back to the deep dive. This is where we dig into the source material you send us and really pull out the key insights. Today, we're shifting gears a bit. We're moving from, say, historical texts to the intense heat of the torch, looking at how ancient myths get reborn in, well, one of the toughest modern mediums, glass. We're focusing on just one piece, but it's a major one, contemporary glass art called La Madre de Quetzalcóatl, the mother of the feathered serpent. Our mission really is to unpack this sculpture and understand that pivotal moment back around 2016. That's when this high-level collaboration decided to push borosilicate glass torchwork beyond just being a specialized craft. They aimed straight for fine art, and they made a very specific choice. They turned away from the usual goal, perfect symmetry, and instead they went after deep cultural myth.
Yeah, and the documentation we have is pretty fantastic. It's not just, describing the finished object. It really gets into the why, the intention behind it, the insane technical work involved, and how they consciously layered in all this cultural weight. So we're tracing how collaboration, mythology, and sheer material skill came together to kind of redefine what glass torchwork could even be.
Okay, let's start at the beginning then, the genesis. Because this wasn't one person's vision, right? It started in 2016, Trinidad, California, and it absolutely needed multiple talents to even get off the ground. And in the glass world, this was, well, it was a summit meeting, wasn't it? Some real leading figures.
Oh, absolutely critical.
Yeah.
You're talking Banjo, Puntington, and Phil Siegel,
Sure.
all teaming up. These artists were already, masters in their own right.
Yeah.
But they brought different skills, different strengths, and the sheer ambition of this piece. It needed all of them.
And how they divided the work. It's fascinating. It shows this clear structure based on who did what best. The sources say the initial idea, the kind of philosophical spark that came from Banjo and Puntington. But they knew, right? They knew that turning that big idea into a complex figure, well, that needed a specialist.
That's exactly it. That's why Phil Siegel was crucial. He was brought in specifically for what the sources call his figurative mastery. I mean, if you're going to sculpt a divine mother figure, you can't just bend some tubes. You need someone who gets form, anatomy, structure, the whole sculptural language.
Right, and even that wasn't the whole picture. The notes mention Peltzer Glass.
Yeah, essential support. For a project this big, you need the right setup, the technical backup. Peltzer helped make it feasible, helped with the infrastructure side.
And then there's the finish. Can't forget that.
No way. Tristan Hodges, described as the cleanup crew, which sounds maybe minor, but it's vital. When you're aiming this high, redefining a medium, every single detail, every weld, the final polish, it all has to be perfect. Hodges ensured the execution matched the concept's ambition.
So the collective goal here, it was genuinely groundbreaking for glass at the time. They weren't just going for complex patterns or, perfect geometry, which, let's be honest, is often how glass impresses people.
Right, symmetry is often the go-to.
Exactly. But their driving force, as we understand it, was to leap past that, to create this divine maternal figure draped in this incredible, flowing, plumed regalia. It was a deliberate pivot, chasing myth, not math.
And that rejection of symmetry, that's a huge technical decision. Symmetrical glass, it's inherently more stable, often easier to manage structurally, especially at scale. By choosing flowing, organic forms like feathers and complex figuration, they were basically inviting difficulty. Structural stress, thermal challenges, it just goes way up when you prioritize narrative flow over predictable shapes.
And that choice, embracing that instability for the story, it's right there in the name. La Madre de Quetzalcóatl, the mother of the feathered serpent.
And what's really interesting is that it's not just a vague nod to Aztec ideas. The name and the form, they point specifically to Chimalma.
Chimalma.
Yeah, as Aztec legend, she's known as the life giver, the primordial mother figure. So the whole piece becomes this profound statement about origin, about creation itself.
Wow. So by invoking her, the life giver who, births the great feathered serpent deity, Quetzalcóatl, they're packing so much narrative depth into the glass. It demands a different kind of attention, way beyond just admiring the material.
Exactly. And that fusion of ancient sacred culture with this really modern, demanding material, that's what immediately lifted the work.
It also connects back to the core of making glass, right? The fire.
Precisely. The deeper meaning here, tied to Chimalma, suggests that the fire, the intense heat you need for borosilicate, isn't just a tool. It's not destructive. It's fundamentally creative. It's like a ritual act of forging life, forging story.
Yeah. Sacred delivery. Yeah, I like that. And the notes really emphasize that feeling, that devotion. They say, every hue, every weld, every plume carried the spirit of devotion. So this is way beyond just skilled making. It's like a spiritual offering made through incredibly difficult, hot, sleepless work.
And that word sleepless, that brings us right to the process. Because it's one thing to feel devoted, it's another thing entirely to translate that massive vision into borosilicate glass.
Mhm.
That took months of just intense physical effort. Sacrifice, really.
Okay, let's pivot to that technical deep dive because this is where you see the commitment, what really separates this piece from maybe more conventional glass craft. We're talking borosilicate, borophilic, which, yeah, it's strong, but it's famously unforgiving, especially when you get big.
Oh, the scale here is key.
Yeah,
When you look at the size of this figurative piece,
yeah.
you realize the difficulty level. The source material actually calls it sleepless torchwork. And that doesn't just mean long hours. It implies working almost constantly, maybe around the clock in shifts, just to keep the heat consistent across these huge sections they were joining.
Because if it cools wrong,
Disaster. If the temperature difference across the piece gets too great, or it cools too fast, internal stress builds up, and the whole thing can just shatter.
months of work just gone, instantly.
Exactly. They had to manage the heat constantly, treat it almost like a living thing needing nonstop attention.
And it wasn't just clear glass they were wrestling with. They needed those complex colors, that feathered look.
Right. Advanced techniques,
Yeah.
like using molten color pulls. That means drawing out these super thin filaments of colored glass from a molten blob. Getting those pulls consistent enough with the right color variations to look like natural feathers across a huge sculpture that's incredibly skillful requires immense control.
And the layered canes mentioned, what does that involve?
So a queen is basically a rod of glass, often with intricate patterns already built inside it. Think like seaside rock, but glass. Layering these, fusing them seamlessly onto a big, curved figure, especially trying to get an organic, flowing feel, not just a repeating pattern, demands perfect heat management, absolute precision in thickness, placement, everything.
Wow. And then mirrored tubing on top of all that.
Yeah, that adds another layer of complexity and visual pop. It's highly reflective, gives it this amazing depth and shimmer. But integrating reflective bits into a complex shape without ugly seams or heat marks, that's pure mastery. It shows they were thinking about light, about reflection, just as much as structure.
So that shared mission, elevating the torch from craft to fine art, it meant the technical struggle couldn't be an excuse. They had to master it so completely that the difficulty just vanishes for the viewer. All you see is Chimalma. You see the feathers. You don't see the sleepless nights.
That's the goal of high art, isn't it? And the sheer physical commitment, those months of sleepless torchwork, that's the hidden story. You're fighting the glass, the thermal shock, the stress, but you're also fighting exhaustion. The scale demanded they push their own limits. That intensity of effort, that's part of what elevates it beyond just a really well-made object.
The creation is epic in itself, but the unveiling, the delivery, that's actually just as important to its story, isn't it? It really cemented its status.
Totally. The choice of where to debut it, that was a statement, a very deliberate strategic move. They knew what they had, and they knew it needed reverence, not just, commerce or hype.
Right, because the sources are clear. It was not shown at a standard glass show booth, not at a big convention, not at what the community sometimes calls a heady show, where things are often about quick sales, lots of buzz.
No, instead, it was presented privately, at the home of a collector identified only as Lori. And this is huge, because her home wasn't just a home. It was described as being like a gallery itself, filled with world-class, internationally recognized contemporary art.
And that context changes everything, doesn't it, placing La Madre there? It forces you to see it not just as amazing glasswork, but as a serious piece of sculpture, standing shoulder to shoulder with bronze, marble, things already accepted by the mainstream art world.
Exactly. The setting amplified its inherent, almost spiritual quality. The notes mention the environment had the same feeling as the work itself. Things like soft light, sacred energy. Showing it privately in that curated space meant it wasn't just an object for sale. It felt more like a presence.
And that was the turning point. It achieved what they set out to do, moving glass from, quote, underground studios to living room galleries. It proved the torch could handle deep history, divinity, complex stories.
And that specific choice of reverence over hype was the final crucial piece. The sources say it required no hype, only reverence. That quiet confidence, that careful placement, that's what really blew the line. It wasn't just art anymore. It felt almost like a relic.
So, wrapping this up, what have we seen here? It's this incredible fusion, isn't it? This powerhouse collaboration, Banjo, Puntington, Siegel meeting profound cultural history, Chimalma, Aztec myth, all brought to life through sheer will, sleepless torchwork in this incredibly difficult medium, borosilicate. It really is a masterpiece born from fire and dedication.
And I think its legacy, connecting it to the bigger picture, is that it didn't just push the technical limits of glass. It fundamentally shifted the perception of glass. It showed that chasing figurative complexity, chasing deep cultural meaning, demanded just as much artistic respect, maybe even more than traditional fine art forms. It broke down some walls.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with this final thought to chew on. La Madre de Quetzalcóatl took months of intense, backbreaking work to create. But its status, its place in art history, was arguably cemented in a single private evening. So if an artwork's meaning, its value, is so heavily influenced by its context being shown in an exclusive private gallery versus a public expo, does the delivery, the setting, end up mattering almost as much as the creation itself? What is that line? When does incredible craft definitively become undeniable art? Something to think about.